Good morning and welcome to the 2019 Student Convention. I'm gonna applaud for myself. Welcome and thank you so much for being here early on a Friday, especially with such a long conference weekend. This event really is all about you, so please network, meet other chapter members, and really just enjoy your time here. The conference weekend goes by in a blur, so hoping that this gives you all a chance to connect, to build relationships, and to learn from one another. We are going to start with a career panel, and my name is Priscilla Rader. I'm the Education Coordinator for the Animal Legal Defense Fund. So, the career panel, we have 6 esteemed animal law experts in a variety of fields. And this panel really is about you able to ask any question that's burning on your mind. And this can be law curriculum choices, interviewing tips, how to get a job after you graduate, anything like that. those pressing questions that I'm sure you all have. It is largely Q&A based, so please do bring up your questions. So I am going to just do a quick presentation on what is animal law, because I'm sure all of you don't know anything about it, and how to look at animal law beyond just the general job positions that are often available, and to see sort of how animal law is connected into all other areas of law. So when I was a 1L at Lewis and Clark Law School, Dean Pamela Frosch, in about 2 weeks into 1L, she met with our students and she was telling us animal law is all law. And I'm nodding my head like, yeah, totally. I didn't quite understand what she really meant by that until I started attending classes and really getting a sense of what types of practices you spot animal issues in. So this is just a small list, but you have environmental law, criminal law, family law, international law, constitutional law, and the list goes on. So one thing that I would like all of you to do is also consider, are there any other fields that you gravitate towards? And if so, how could you maybe incorporate animal law issues into that field as well? It can kind of create a niche for you going out into the world trying to find jobs, but also it's a way to normalize animal law and bring it into all areas of practice. So, some ways to use your law degree, post-grad, with animal law as your focus. So you could be a staff attorney for an animal law protection organization. I think this is the one that most of you think about when you think what you want to do post-graduation, such as working for the Animal Legal Defense Fund, HSUS, PETA, Mercy for Animals. Fortunately, I would say almost every single animal organization now has a legal staff on board, which means more job opportunities for all of you. But there's also fellowship options. The Animal Legal Defense Fund, PETA, Mercy for Animals, and many others have started offering fellowship programs in animal law. You could do private practice. We have Ryan Gordon does private practice on this, so he'll be touching on that aspect of it, but you could just start up your own practice. You could be a prosecutor who takes on animal law cases. You could be the go-to in your DA's office. If there's an animal law case that comes in, they know to give it to you. You could do pro bono, part of Animal Law Legal Defense Fund's pro bono network. You could sign up, work your day job, and do pro bono for us or for another organization. You could be a lobbyist or a legislator. You could do government agency work. This is really difficult work, but animals really need people in the inner workings making decisions with their welfare in mind. And you could also be do criminal defense for animal activists. This is, again, just a list of ideas, definitely not an exhaustive list. What if you don't want to practice, though? What if you're like me and in 3L, you're like, oh, I don't know if I want to practice. Or like Kelly Lavenda, student programs attorney here at Animal Legal Defense Fund, who really wanted to use her legal education to work in education. Well, that's an option too. Nonprofit organizations are often hiring for communications, campaign management, education and outreach. development, and much more. And your legal skills can really translate well into those areas. You could also teach. You could be a professor, either full-time or adjunct. We have a few professors on staff. You could also do marketing and advertising, public relations, putting your legal education to work through outreach, marketing, and getting the animal law word out there. So again, just a few ideas to keep in mind while we move over to Q&A. So, with me today, I'm going to just give names, titles, affiliations. I'm going to let them do the work of introducing themselves because I want to know a few key highlights that they'd like you guys to know about their backgrounds, their experiences, or their insight. So we have Professor Randy Abate. He's the chair of the Marine and Environmental Law and Policy program at Monmouth University. If you want to wave, Professor. Do you want to wave? We have Ryan Gordon. He's the Chief Executive Officer and Director of Litigation at Advancing Law for Animals. Do you want to wave? We have Kevin Schneider, Executive Director of the Nonhuman Rights Project. Amy Wilson, Aquatic Animal Law Fellow for the Center for Animal Law Studies. Did she wave? Oh, yes. We have Delcianna Winders, Assistant Director of the Litigation, Farm and Animal Litigation Clinic at the Lewis and Clark Law School. Oh, okay, you're ahead of the game. And last but not least, we have Kathleen Wood, Staff Attorney at the Criminal Justice Program at the Animal Legal Defense Fund. All right, so Kevin, do you want to start off, just say a few highlights about where you're at now, the type of work that you do, and anything you'd like to add to the students?
Thank you. I guess I'm first because I'm right next to you, but
Poor
okay,
planning.
I won't read into that. This is kind of a homecoming for me. Back in my law school days, I went to Florida State University. Actually, this is going to sound like bitter fruit, but I applied to Lewis and Clark. I didn't get in, but in retrospect, looking back, I think that was not a bad thing. I think that I had it set in my head. I think like a lot of us up here and a lot of you, that the only reason I wanted to go to law school was to do the kind of work that we're doing now, to try to advance the cause and protection and interests of animals. And so when I got to FSU, which was not exactly known for its reputation like Lewis and Clark in terms of animal law, it was actually, I think, a good thing in a way because it was practice representing these ideas to a crowd that was a lot more skeptical about them. And that's good practice for taking this stuff out into the world because as great as we are, we sometimes live in a bubble, right? We often can just be talking to folks who more or less agree with us. So that, I think, was a good start for me. And so from there, I got myself involved with the Nonhuman Rights Project. It was actually really one of the reasons I went to law school was reading about it and the work of Steve Wise, our founder. And I just kept doing whatever he wanted me to do the whole time. You got volunteer work, I'll do it. You got a habeas corpus memo, I don't know what that means, but sure, I'll do it. Whatever. And then, time goes by, 6 years go by, and gently nudging, you got a job yet? Got a job yet? And eventually, it worked out. So that's the kind of abridged version of how I got to where I am. And it was interesting to hear you in your introduction because I feel pretty privileged. And I think a lot of us are able to do this as we develop and go forward. I'm not as pigeonholed, so I'm able to practice a little bit. I'm able to be involved in our litigation work, which I can talk about a little bit more later. But I'm also doing kind of day-to-day management in my role as executive director. Not always fun, but that's okay because these are important things that need to get done, and making sure the website works and people are being paid right, and employees are doing what they're supposed to be doing, and you're taking care of hiring and everything else. That stuff is, like Priscilla said, not strictly in the confines of legal practice, but still very important and obviously, critical for an organization to keep on moving, to keep the wheels on. So I will I think I'll just stop there and, you know, pass the mic down. But that's kind of a nutshell, I think, of how, you know, when you know what you want to go into law for, and you find a way to keep at it, eventually, you know, I think you'll land somewhere good.
Perfect. So I also went to law school to practice animal law, and I did spend a year clerking for a federal court of appeals judge, but ever since that wrapped up, I've been practicing animal law in a variety of settings for the past 12 years, including with PETA, with Farm Sanctuary, at Harvard's Animal Law and Policy program, and with a public interest firm. And I've worked in a variety of areas, primarily on behalf of animals used for food, animals used for entertainment, and animals used for experimentation, but other animals as well. And throughout this time, in addition to practicing, I have also taught animal law at a number of different law schools and published animal law scholarships. So really throughout my career, I've sort of straddled the line between practice and academia, and recently I was able to unify those two by joining the faculty at Lewis & Clark, where I'm a professor, and I'm directing the brand new animal law litigation clinic. And that's focused specifically on farmed animals, and I am so excited about it.
Hello, my name is Ryan. Ryan Gordon. I work for Advancing Law for Animals. I went to law school with an aim to do animal law. And like Kevin, I started working for a Nonhuman Rights project in law school when it was still really in its infancy. We were doing like weekly calls with Steve, me and like 5 other people for years actually. And so after law school, it is hard to get a job in animal law. I fortunately just did volunteer work for several nonprofits, ALDF being one of them, for a few years afterwards, and eventually landed a job at, I was general counsel for Beagle Freedom Project for several years. I don't know if, it used to be a bigger nonprofit. It seems to have diminished in the last few years, but for a while it was pretty big. It still is. I don't want to disparage it. But, and then I left there, and now I, along with some other people, started our own nonprofit called Advancing Law for Animals, and still, you know, we're still have time to do some private practice work, but mainly, the good thing about being a lawyer is you can forge your own path. You don't need to necessarily wait on other nonprofits to help you. You know, if you have an idea, you want to do a case, you can do it. Especially in litigation, it's the one branch of government where you can go stand up there yourself. You don't need a lobbyist to get there. You need a case, you need clients, but you can do that on your own. You don't need to have your hand held, or you can make yourself competent first, because when you get out of law school and pass the bar, I assure you most people don't know what they're doing. Most senior attorneys don't know what they're doing, but myself included half the time. I'm not trying to put myself up, but as a lawyer, you are in a unique position where you can go accomplish things yourself. You don't need to wait. If you can't find a job, you can go network with, you know, activists, or there's lots of different ways you could do it, but you can make something happen on your own, especially as a lawyer. So anyway.
Hi everyone, I'm Amy, and I'm currently working as Aquatic Animal Law Initiative Fellow at the Center for Animal Law Studies. When I was in law school, animal law in South Africa didn't exist. It's still not currently in any law schools, so I wasn't able to have a focus on it, but I always knew that I wanted to do something with animals. So when I left law school, I ended up practicing corporate law for about 7 years, mostly working for the man, doing like mining work actually, so kind of the exact opposite of everything I do now. And that was my path until I found out about animal law and Lewis & Clark. And basically when I did, I left practice to do my LLM, and haven't left, and now have dedicated my life to doing this. I founded the first animal law organization in South Africa, and really there we're spearheading the same kind of efforts that are going around the world. And also I work within Africa on a continental scale. And yeah, do lots of different things, from academia to practice to advising to nonprofit work to running a website, managing volunteers. Really everything and all the skills that I learned as a corporate lawyer, I've managed to implement into my animal law, and I feel like it's made me a better lawyer. So that was my kind of really indirect path to animal law, but very happy that I did it, and yeah, happy to answer any questions.
Hi, I'm Kathleen. I work at the Animal Legal Defense Fund in the Criminal Justice Program. Like many people up here, I went to law school hoping to get into animal law. I chose Notre Dame because they have a really good public interest focus, and so I was actually able to get a fellowship straight out of law school through my law school and use ALDF as my host organization. And then once I started working for ALDF's Criminal Justice Program, I took over a couple of big projects like the annual rankings report, and kind of conned them into keeping me for longer than the 2 years, being like, you want to keep doing your annual rankings report? I'm the one who does that now. But I also do a lot of legislative work in the role, so it's not, our program helps prosecutors and law enforcement around the country with animal cruelty cases, but I also do a lot of legislative work strengthening animal protection bills, and recently we've been publishing farm-to-animal cruelty prosecution guides for each state, so I've been putting those together. So it's just a little bit of everything. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Randy Abate. Each panel has an oddball, and I guess that's me. I am the only one on the panel who did not go to law school to practice animal law. Animal law didn't exist when I went to law school. I think maybe 5 years after I graduated, I attended Vermont Law School, and maybe 5 years after I graduated, Steve Wise was teaching animal law as an adjunct there for the first time, and I was thinking, who would want to teach a course like that? I just had no idea what the field was, no appreciation for how it was a fantastic career and field to pursue. So I have a 30 plus year career in environmental law, and coming to animal law was very late in the game, really the past decade, and I've been exclusively involved with animal law through the lens of environmental law. And both domestic and international environmental law informed a lot of what I ultimately came to do with animal law as a professor and a scholar and a mentor. My favorite part about coming to animal law is this room like this, being able to mentor animal law students about possible career opportunities and to just get excited about this field, even if you don't practice it for a day in your career. It's just such a wonderful field and a wonderful community of people to be connected with, to grow as a lawyer and as a person. I feel like I'm a better, more compassionate person since I came to animal law. It's a fantastic field to study and hopefully be involved with in some capacity in your career. And I'm also probably the only person in the room who doesn't have a companion animal, so I'd throw that out there too. There's so many different ways you can intersect with animal law, and I think I come at it from a different angle in many ways for what that's worth, and happy to share my perspectives from that lens.
Thank you all so much. And Professor Abate does have some materials on the table in the back if you wanted to look at. He wrote a book on what animal law can learn from environmental law, and it's very fascinating. Look at the lessons we can learn from other movements, and so definitely go take a look during one of the breaks. Thank you all so much. We will now move to, yes. Thank you. We will now start with questions. I'm hoping that the room will project if you just want to stand and then and say your question, but we do have a microphone here as well. So, who's going to be first? I won't cold call people, but I kind of will. Looking at you guys.
Okay, my question is for Kevin. You mentioned that you do hiring. What do you look for in an advocate when you are hiring someone who's newer out of law school?
So the question is to Kevin, but I would have, if any of the panelists would like to answer as well, what kind of candidate do you look for in hiring once they have graduated?
So one thing, and this is maybe not what you want to hear, but that they have not just graduated. Frankly, no, and I think my own experience was the same. When I got out, I'm ironic that I'm on a career panel, I'm about to say this, but I did not do the on-campus interviews. I didn't do any of that stuff in law school. I even felt a little stress about it because I was like, shouldn't I be doing this? But I just had this faith that if I kept going and volunteering and doing what I was doing, that things would eventually work out. So I moved to New York after law school, where I live now, and I, believe it or not, found a number of legitimate legal lawyer jobs on Craigslist. It's a thing. And you'd be surprised the depths that you'll go to once you get out there. And one of my first jobs was doing plaintiff's law. So and when you're in that field in particular, you're thrown right in. So I think that can be a good entry point for folks, especially if you're like me and you didn't really, try to take the corporate approach. But in general, I think the kind of qualities we look for, and I think a lot of folks look for, attention to detail. One thing, and this can sound silly, but it makes a big difference when we post a job, whether it's for a lawyer or a campaigns director or whatever. We're now happily in a place where we're doing hiring more frequently. I've started putting in a little, instructions that say to apply, send your, resume and cover letter combined as a PDF to my email. You'd be surprised how many people just don't pay attention to that sort of thing. And for me, as someone who's fielding a lot of resumes potentially, that's a way to say, okay, well, maybe I'll get back to you, but you haven't actually paid attention to the thing that I wrote. So, those kinds of little things, that can sound silly, but from the perspective of a hirer, someone who's hiring, that makes a lot of difference, because there's the human element of, there's a person on the other side that has to actually read what I'm sending, and so paying attention to those little details frankly can make a lot of difference. But in general, I would just say that getting out there and having experience, for me, I like to think that I'm not like a credentialist. I'm not bowled over by like big names or like big institutions or this or that. If you can give me, very specific breakdown of what you did in a particular job, like I wrote X number of complaints in these different areas, I did X number of depositions, I did however many hearings, motions, things like that, and a good writing sample. I think those things are among the top things. But and just to go back to the beginning, not to sound too discouraging, but even like 2, 3, 4 years of experience, it can sound like, oh my God, law school all over again. But life starts to go a little faster once you're out there. So you'd be surprised how quick that much time goes by. But I would also say in the meantime, to continue volunteering with people, or like Ryan said, you can find opportunities to bring cases yourself. If you meet an activist or someone who's having a small-scale animal problem in their community or something, or maybe they're an activist who's getting heat for exercising their free speech rights, that can be a way for you to take on a pro bono client, and that's something that I would generally think looks extremely impressive on a resume if you're able to offer those kinds of specifics. So, just showing that you really have a burning desire to do this kind of work is still extremely important, because we're as big as we are getting, we're still fairly small, and you do still have to, I think, do things to stand out.
Yeah, right.
I just wanted to add to that. Is this on? That in addition to the practical experience you want to have, certainly to land a job in practice, one of the things that I think is incredibly valuable and is probably underestimated is the opportunity to get published. I don't think anything kind of defines your passion and your expertise for going into a field than getting an article published, especially when you're still a law student. I think at a minimum it's a talking point in an interview, and at most it could be something that makes a difference between you and another candidate for getting an opportunity in the field. There just aren't that many animal law articles out there, and the fact that you as a student would be one of those, you could initially get recognition from employers before you even seek positions if it's published and is well received. So it's absolutely something that I highly encourage, and more than 40 of my former students at Florida A&M over the span of 5 years were published in academic journals. Probably a third of those were exclusively animal law articles, and it really helped them develop their career. So I highly encourage that, and happy to talk to you about strategizing ways to get that done while you're in law school.
And I also just wanted to add really an emphasis on why this job, why a job in animal law. And for like my department, which is criminal, why do you want to work on the criminal side of it? Really emphasize those. You can craft your narrative, especially in your cover letter, to kind of demonstrate how you ended up on this trajectory. Make sure to personalize your cover letters. Don't just send a generic one. Yeah, just make sure that your passion is really evident. And make sure that your passion for working with all kinds of animals is evident. I mean, it's wonderful if you've adopted a dog from a shelter, but you know, make sure that the interviewer knows that you're not just interested in companion animals, that you're interested in protecting all kinds of animals. And then a word about the writing samples. Make sure it's something that you've authored, just you. We've gotten writing samples that are, you know, my organization published this, I wrote most of it. That doesn't really show me which parts you wrote and how many layers it went through before it was published. So make sure that's something that you've actually authored.
Thank you. I did want to do a quick show of hands. How many are you 1Ls? Okay, 2Ls? Ooh, okay, 3Ls? And LLM students? They're all right there. Perfect, thank you. It's a really good blend. All right, back to Q&A. Questions? Yes.
So it's really cool to hear how you guys were able to follow your passions in your career. I know sometimes though when we make a passion job, you get burned out on that. So I'd like to hear about some of the activities or other sort of mindfulness things you do to keep yourself grounded in your work when it comes to extremely difficult to deal with animal issues.
The question is how to prevent burnout, especially when your job is your passion. Very great question. Yeah, no one. Yeah.
Horrible work-life balance. Really bad.
What is that?
Every day, you know.
I'll take a stab at answering that because it's something I've struggled with, to be honest, throughout my career, and I think I've gotten a little bit better at it. And I've also witnessed a lot of people struggle with it, and I've witnessed people leave the movement because of it. And so it's something I try to instill in my students, the importance of it, because we need happy, healthy lawyers for the animals who are going to be in it for the long game. So for me personally, I do have a mindfulness practice. I try to do mindfulness meditation every day, even if it's just 10 minutes. Some days it's even 5 minutes, but I try to just make a point of doing that. Try to make a point of, you know, trying to get out of the house, even if it's just to walk the dog or get out of the office, and just little things like that to sort of create balance. But I think it's something we need to be constantly cognizant of, and also as employers we need to be cognizant of it for the people who are working for us.
Yeah, I'm really lucky at ALDF. One of our core values is work-life balance, and so there's a lot of emphasis on maintaining that, and a lot of policies put in place. For example, they just instituted sabbatical for people who've been there for 5 years, can take a paid sabbatical to just reset and clear your mind. Because, yeah, if you don't have those breaks, and then also people that you're working with to really lean on and talk about these things, yeah, you can definitely get burned out.
Even though I don't litigate these cases, I do have a perspective to share on this, and it's the difference between passion and anger. I think this kind of field can fill you with frustration in a lot of the atrocities that occur, but I think that it's work that requires a great deal of passion and compassion, and I think it's difficult to draw that line between passion and anger sometimes, and it's something to be aware of as you work in the field. And I think there's just a matter of finding that balance in this field the way you would in any field. About being too zealous about anything in life isn't good. And you know, the best example I have is when my son was first a vegan. He was very passionate in an angry kind of way. Basically, for the first 2 years he was a vegan, I was a vegetarian at the time, transitioning to be a vegan, and I was called on a daily basis a coward for supporting the patriarchy every day that I wasn't a vegan. And you know, I got tired of having my ears bleed as I walked out of the room every day. And so it was I respected that level of passion that he had for the field. But then I kept reminding him, you're going to alienate your intended audiences if you don't take it down a few levels. You can be very passionate about animals without alienating your audiences.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And just to follow on that a little bit, because this is something I've struggled with. I think, like Delcy was just saying, like it's pretty common to go through that angry vegan phase, I think. It's kind of like the Matrix moment. You're like, oh my God, doesn't everyone around me see how awful this is? Why am I the only one seeing this? And that can be really hard to take a step back from, to kind of separate. It's kind of that old saying of, was it hate the sin, not the sinner? And that can sound sort of old-fashioned or out of place, but I often find that it's very helpful for me. And also, the actual working, whether you're in court or, thankfully, we haven't done much legislative stuff, but we're starting to, so I think that's even more of a headache in some ways, obviously. But I think a recognition that I think so often we're kind of playing at a bit of a remove, right? So, for example, when we're in front of judges talking about habeas corpus for animals and personhood for animals like we were earlier this week, we can get all kinds of reactions. Thankfully, we're at a point now where the judge we're in front of is actually giving us a lot of time, hours and hours to really go into the details of all this stuff, but that's not always the case. And you might run into a judge or somebody who wants to shut you down right away. And that can obviously be very frustrating, right? I did all this work, all this passion, and you're just going to brush it off. I think it's very important to keep in mind that, look at history, look at the way social change happens. And I've come to the realization for myself that it's not so much about changing people. I used to think, when I first got into this, my motivation was, well, this is a behavior problem. We have to change the way people eat, the way they act, the way they entertain themselves. And I think that is part of it, but I also think it goes a lot deeper than that, which can seem harder while you're going to kind of hack the underlying philosophy of the world or the outlook of the world. But at the same time, it's also comforting because you don't have to judge every individual that you disagree with. You can see them as, and indeed we all are, right? We all inherit problematic tendencies or ideas from the past or from all kinds of places. And I think it can be somewhat of an antidote to burnout to just indeed take a deep breath and say that I don't need to leave here with a victory. I don't need to change this person's mind to feel like I've done my job here for the day, because the world just doesn't seem to change that way. It works in slower ways. Now we know more about, for example, judicial bias, the way that judges, lo and behold, they're humans too, right? They process the world like humans do, and that sometimes means that they have biases, and certainly a bias against animals having rights or greater protections is a very real thing. But rather than, I think, get frustrated or feel like you're banging your head into a wall over and over again, looking at history and how social change has always happened, you don't have to convert everybody. You just have to keep making the argument and do it in a way that doesn't, you're always, like Randy said with his son, you don't want to make people's ears bleed, but you also don't want to let them forget the issues. So, and also take breaks, go outside. It's okay, it's good. Run around.
Thank you. And I will add, know your worth. If you're working for an employer who is just, 80-hour weeks, no breaks, no time, know your worth. And there's often the saying that, oh, it's for the animals, but like Delcy said, we need you healthy, those animals need you healthy. And so it's really important that you're some of the most compassionate people I'll ever meet, but you have to have compassion for yourself as well. So just take those breaks, find a hobby that has nothing to do with law or animals, find friends who maybe are outside of the bubble, so you can just have a place where you can go to something of your own that is outside of what you're doing, because when it's your passion, there's always that, if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life, but it's really, if you do what you love, you'll never have a break, because it's both professional and personal. So really do just be there for yourself, know your worth, and show compassion to yourself as well. Any other questions? Yes. Oh, yes.
Hi, my question is regarding the policy work in litigation. So when you first started out as a full-time job as a lawyer, should you restrict yourself and really stronger on one side or the other, and know that you want to work on one side or the other? Or should you be open possibility to
So the question is, if you, after you graduate, policy or litigation, should you just, find a job with wherever you can, or should you really try to focus in on what you know your strengths are, what you're passionate about? And I will leave it up to you guys.
I would say don't assume that you know what your strengths are until you actually, because, one thing, say you want to do policy or legislative work more, well, having some experience with how judges actually interpret these things in a real way is going to be some of the best experience you often can get. So our campaigns manager was a former attorney, and she now really, does a little bit, but all of that, her previous litigation work, I think, has only helped her become a better policy and legislative person. So, yeah, I wouldn't, and sometimes you can surprise yourself. You think you know what you want, and then you actually get out there and you realize, hey, I don't really like this as much as I thought, but this other thing is kind of fun.
Just make sure that you're emphasizing the ways that those things cross over. Like you said, how judges would interpret certain statutes, how that would help in a legislative context. Make sure you're really pulling those things out when you're interviewing for a job to show that, you have developed skills that will translate well to where you're going.
Not being an American lawyer, I would just say generally don't limit yourself ever in the beginning of your career, or actually just throughout your career, to any one area, because any experience you get is going to be useful for whatever you want to do. So just as a general word to everyone, I think I never thought my experience would overlap so much and so well, but it always does. And like Kevin mentioned, things change and you'll move around a bit. So just start off broad and then maybe hone in.
Yeah, your first job out of graduation probably won't be your last job, so, just get that experience. And I have a follow-up question to that. Do you think it's more, if you do want to practice law in animal law, do you think it's more important to find any job in the legal realm, or do you need to focus on an animal law organization or doing non-legal work? What do you think is better? Because a lot of times I'll see on requirements for job postings 5 years experience law. So how do you think that translates in hiring when you're looking at experience?
I can speak from my experience. I've been responsible for hiring at most of my past jobs and will be hiring a staff attorney in the next year or so.
3 L's.
I think it's more important to have legal experience, and we recognize that there are a finite number of animal law jobs right out there, more than ever, with the various fellowship programs that are available. But there are also jobs in animal law that are wanting someone with 5, 7, 8 years experience, and they're having a hard time filling some of those positions. And we want people who are good lawyers first and foremost, because you're not going to help the animals if you're not a good lawyer. So yes, we want to see that you are truly interested in animals, but I would say if you're choosing between doing something non-legal but still animal related and staying within the legal realm, build your legal skills, because no matter what area of the law you're working in, it can translate to animal law, because every single area of the law intersects with animals.
And just keep your foot in the door of the animal law world. Sign up for ALDF's Pro Bono Network. Keep attending conferences just to keep demonstrating your interest and getting your ins with that community.
Great point. Great. Another question? I know a lot of your names, so just, yes. Yes, you.
Hi. So I have a question, I think it's the most specific solution. What are the first steps like trying to establish a legal career in another country? I have a very particular place in mind that I think about graduation, and it sounds like you might know a bit about doing that and what that looks like and working your attitudes with regular animals, starting with education to build that. Do you
So the question is, particularly for Amy, but other panelists might have some insight, is how do you begin a career post-graduation internationally? So whether that's to do legal policy work there or to start an organization similar to what Amy did. So just tips in branching out into international law. Or not international law, but the legal field.
Thanks. So I guess my intention was not necessarily to go this route, so I don't know if that's the best. But basically, I think a lot of the work that I have done has been for international organizations, so I think it kind of follows the same advice that I would give to anyone, would just be to like build your skills, build your legal knowledge, start volunteering with organizations, get your name out there, and then start connecting with people in international organizations. So obviously some of the big ones you already know, they operate in a lot of different places, and just meeting like a person there and forming a relationship with them will help you form a network, and they'll introduce you to other people. And that's kind of like how it's worked for me, is just through meeting people and networking, and really just in my own space, like building up my own skills and knowledge and doing good work. And then I think that just translates to everything around you. When you meet people, they see what you're doing, and then kind of things happen, but people talk about you without you even having to know, and you know, it just kind of like spreads like that, if that makes any sense. Mm-hmm. So really just like work hard, make contact with people that you, like I reached out to a lot of organizations to say like, hi, I love what you're doing. You might not even be looking for a job, but if you are ever, I want to work for you. You know, I just went as far as to do that. So I just guess be bold in that sense.
Thank you. Yeah, I do think there's the saying of, you know, it's all about who you know, but I'd flip that and say it's about who knows you, who remembers you, hopefully for the better. And so making those connections is really, really important in this field, not only nationally but internationally as well. And the Animal Legal Defense Fund and other organizations would always be happy to, you know, if we know someone, and especially if they're at this conference, if you want to meet anyone at this conference, you can find me and I will barge into any circle and introduce you. I am not shy. So, you know, just make those connections, meet as many people that you can, and just, yeah, just, it's about who you know and just building your skills. I think that skills translate no matter where you are, so even if it's international. Other questions? Yes.
For the litigators, how do you guys approach this judicial bias?
So for the litigators, how do you approach the judicial bias that you're often confronted with?
Well, so trial and error, because you know the first few times, you know, let me be honest. Most judges, they tend to be pensive. They tend to be smart. They will listen to you. Most of them actually, I've found, give you a pretty fair shake. I have noticed that the more senior I've gotten, and the more deference they give you in a sense. Younger lawyers, even if you make a really good argument, I know the judges are just like, yeah, you're a kid. Which I'm still sure they do it to me in some capacity, but I notice the more senior you get, the more deference you get. But generally, I think you get a pretty fair shake. There are instances, though. So I litigated, or was one of several, but I was doing the oral arguments for a Caparo case for United Poultry Concerns years ago. And the judge in this, now this would be a textbook example of her just not wanting us in the court. I mean, there were a lot of attorneys who worked in this complaint. We had standing. We threaded the needle properly. It was Haven standing, for those you know what it is. It was an unfair competition case in state court in California, and we threaded the needle. Our complaint was proper, and so the other side brought a demur, and I don't know if they have that in Portland. I presume they do, but it's akin to a 12b6 motion in state court. Is there a demur?
It's motion to dismiss.
Motion to dismiss here. Okay. In any case, the judge, she was just not having it. I remember she went so far as to say, well, I'm dismissing this on constitutional grounds, and the other side didn't even raise constitutional grounds. They hadn't filed an answer yet, so they hadn't asserted an affirmative defense, and they admitted that the statutes that we were using as our the violations of the unfair competition law. They admitted statutes were constitutional, so it wasn't even an issue. But she just wanted the case out of her courtroom. So so you will occasionally find a bias. That being said, since then we've had pretty good luck. I would say scope out the judges beforehand, Google them, see what kind of demeanor they have. I've gone and sat in courtrooms just for I'll go down to the courtroom once I see that I'm assigned somewhere, and I'll just sit there and watch them for like a half hour just to get an idea of their demeanor. But it is you will have to deal with it, and I would say when you are dealing with it, there's difference in arguments that you make right out of law school that you might find moving, but judges are not, at a certain point, they're going to look like that's BS. They're not going to find it moving. So I think you're going to have to learn how to just not proffer those sorts of things to them, and you're going to instead have to come up with something that they will understand or will accept. But in the beginning, I'm not giving good advice on this, but I would say scope out your judge if you have an opportunity. Like in California, we have a 170.6 peremptory challenge. You can ding your judge and get rid of them, so you can do that. I'm assuming there's something similar here, but scope out your judge beforehand, Google them, and ask around, talk to other lawyers. But you're going to just have to deal with some degree of bias. But then once you're past that point, then just only give arguments that you're probably going to win on, and your less likely arguments, put them in there, but preserve them only for appeal purposes. Don't expect to win on them. So I guess if that was fairly good.
There's a downside to trying to have a judge removed? Do you find that can blow back because then they're like...
Well, I would not try to have them removed. So in California, the peremptory challenge is automatic. You just file an affidavit and it's gone. It gets reassigned to a new department. You don't know what department. You might wind up very well worse off. But so you have to make that calculation yourself. If you try to remove them when they're in the case claiming they have a bias, then you're probably not going to win the motion, first of all, because they're going to say, well, I'm not biased, I'm just judging you as you stand, and I don't like your case. But yeah, I wouldn't advise doing that, because that's, unless, you could run into an instance where someone genuinely is incapable of giving you a fair shake, but that's, I don't think it's going to rise to that level. But that was a word salad almost, but I hope you took something of value from it.
It was helpful. You're good.
I just want to briefly add to that. Judges are human, and that means they're going to be biased, but it also means they do care about animals on some level, and you can do all the homework in the world, and you won't know how your judge is going to respond to your argument. And oral argument is your best opportunity to try and address these issues and address the bias. And this is general advice for litigation, but you need to be prepared to pivot in your arguments to go where the judge is signaling to you that they're willing to go and the things that they're interested in. And some judges aren't going to want to hear about the animals and what's going on with them. They just care about the law, and you need to be able to read that and pivot in that direction. Other judges, you may not know from all your research, but they actually do care. I had a judge in North Carolina, old Southern guy. He just, right out the gate, he was like, wait, what's going on with these animals? Wanted to know all these details, even though they weren't really in the record. And you need to be prepared to go with that. So it's really just being able to read things and pivot to where you need to go on the spot.
And ALDF has been trying to address this by doing judicial trainings. We just wrote a bench book for juvenile and family court judges. But also, I mean, we've run into this in the criminal justice program. Somebody contacted us out of Tennessee saying, I know this judge, I know they're going to say that pre-conviction forfeiture is unconstitutional, help. And we basically just wrote out a memo and had them submit it and put it on the record, and the judge actually cited it in his opinion and said, he more or less sounded like he was backed into a corner saying, yes, because of all of this research and like overwhelming evidence, I have to find that this is constitutional. He was very reluctant, but just make sure that you're covering all of your bases. And then also, this is kind of tangential, but we do a lot of supplying voir dire questions. And a big part of voir dire is indoctrination and framing the issues the way that you want the jury to be thinking of them during the trial. And so if you have a case where a chicken has been badly abused, you know, you can ask questions like, you know, you're probably a meat eater, you probably eat chicken, but, you know, the law says that dogs and chickens have to be treated the same. They're both considered animals, and they both can be subject to criminal cruelty. So, you know, like, are you comfortable judging this chicken as if it was a dog under the law? So just kind of like refocusing their minds can help too.
And I would just add, and from our experience, Nonhuman Rights Project, this is definitely a recurring theme and something we've given a lot of thought to over the years. So one thing, just to follow on, is you do want to, as much as possible, paint the judge into a corner. I find that often, especially when you're asking a judge to make a ruling, perhaps a bold ruling, or you know, really a divergent kind of ruling for animals, it might sit well with them, but again, them being human, you have to think of kind of mundane things like, well, the next time they're at their annual judge convention and their law school friend comes up to them and says, what the hell did I read? You're the one that gave rights to animals? You know, you have to give them an ability to say, well, yeah, you know, I wasn't quite convinced either, but then, you know, X, Y, Z, they laid it out, and it was really, what else was I going to do, right? I'm a judge, I have to follow the law. But also, I would say, we can't just, you know, with the judicial bias training is a good example, but it's not only in the courtroom. So this is where I think a lot of the public education and the media aspect can become relevant. Judges, like most people, when they know they're being watched, they sit up a little straighter and they're like, oh, okay. And you know, they need to also get signals, and that can come from, you know, just the presence of lay people, non-parties, or the public in a courtroom. You know, like judges are used to not having people in their courtroom, so when they see an issue, an animal case that actually brings people to the courtroom, I think that's relevant. It might not get you a win right away, but it does help build the case in the judge's mind and the kind of judicial system's mind generally that this is an issue that people care about. This is not a frivolous thing. This is something that, you know, the public increasingly cares a lot about. And so the aspect of being watched, I think, can help correct against some bias. But also, you know, I don't want to call it shaming, but in a way it's shaming. You know, when you're able to get the attention of like media and really get them to understand how badly animals in our cases are being screwed over for really no good reason other than they're not human, we're starting to see that that's paying dividends because, you know, people don't want to be or seen or feel to be, you know, arbitrary, or especially a judge. So I think, don't think it all happens in the courtroom because there are these other factors at play all the time.
Thank you all, and I will just add two quick things. With all of your free time as law students, I really encourage you to sit in on a case. If it's animal law, great, but even if it's just whatever you can fit into your schedule, just to see how it's run and how judges respond to arguments, how the attorneys are presenting their arguments. It's really fascinating, and judges, again, they're human, so they're all different, so really knowing your judges helps. And I will add, it's an older article, but Director of Litigation at the Animal Legal Defense Fund, Matthew Liebman, he wrote an article called What the Judge Ate for Breakfast, and it's a little bit about sorry. That's a good catch, though. Who the judge ate for breakfast, and it's about.
Now.
I know. I'm almost never caught, and it's about judicial bias and reviewing that. So very great article resource.
I would also say, like, and you don't learn this in law school, be nice to the clerks. If you're in a courtroom, you have to understand that they're often the real center of power. The judge just kind of comes and goes and really relies on her court staff. And we've seen this firsthand. You know, we try very hard. We go above and beyond to be extra professional, you know, binders of cases and, you know, really going above and beyond. We just had this in Monday. We had a court attorney come up to us and actually say, you know, in a break, you guys are the best advocates I've ever seen. You're so professional. You're so passionate. I think that sort of stuff helps us generally overcome this bias that we're, you know, a bunch of cat ladies or weirdos or vegan crazy people, which we may be, but, you know, we can still put a suit on and pretend that we're not.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes. Sorry, it's a little tricky to see, so you could just stand up. Thanks, Kartik.
It seems like a lot of animal law focuses on civil impact litigation, so I'm wondering, from a hiring point of view, what the relevance is for experience in other areas like criminal prosecution or administrative proceedings, or even things like legal services that don't follow the code of civil procedure, things like that. I know a lot of the world still are people wondering how important it is to build familiarity specifically about the kind of work you're going into.
And I will repeat the question just for the recording. He's asking, a lot of animal laws, specifically with organizations, is high impact civil litigation. Is there something to be said about gaining other experience, such as an administrative law or criminal prosecution, or how is that reviewed during hiring?
I think knowing administrative law is very important. A lot of the animal stuff does turn into that realm because you're dealing with governments a lot, and this, you know, states have various APAs which operate rather similarly. So I think you need to know that. And did he ask about civil procedure too? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and yeah, learn that. I mean, it is very advantageous to be masterful in civil procedure. Because, I mean, you know, I've gotten a few cases in the animal law realm purely because no one else knew how to do, you know, go in ex parte and do a preliminary injunction, which I think of it as rather commonplace. You should know how to do that, but you know, I'm sure most attorneys could figure it out, but they maybe have not been in an opportunity where they actually have to do it. Mm-hmm. But so yeah, I think they're both very important, especially the APA. Learn that. Take your administrative law classes. Yeah, it's really important. So.
Yeah. A little follow on. So I would say, yeah, the broad experience is generally a good thing. And this I think is a good sign. You know, it really depends. There's a diversity of what different organizations or employers, potential employers, will respond to. So it makes total sense that because of the nature of things, a lot of this work is still in the administrative arena. But for us at Nonhuman Rights Project, you know, we're a little different, which again I think is a sign that we're, as a movement, we're really growing, and it's not just, you know, one type of approach. So often, you know, when we get resumes, we're really looking at civil rights experience because we think that's most closely analogous to the types of cases that we're doing. Kind of foundationed on human rights principles and stuff. And as far as the civil procedure stuff goes, it's kind of, in New York in particular, it's one of the most kind of heinous states when it comes to the complexity of it. I mean, people make their whole livings on just knowing how to find a little corner of the civil practice book and just live there and just basically kind of screw people over with it. But that being said, it's still such an important thing. But I would also say that, at least from my experience, you really can't hope to learn it from a book. And so often we see that, you know, in New York, again, where we're most commonly litigating, but Connecticut and some other states too, you have the civil practice book as it's written, and then how it actually exists. And you can't know that until you've actually tried to use it. But having I feel like you know, again, going back to the way that we work, and I think it's pretty common for animal organizations generally, you don't always know where your next case is coming from. So, which is actually, I find, one of the more exciting parts of what we do, or one of the many exciting parts, is that you can be working in New York and then California and Colorado. And so having an ability to, or if you can demonstrate in any way, an ability to like up and change your way of thinking and switch gears pretty quickly to another state, or even to another, you know, from civil to administrative to criminal, I think generally that's a good thing. But you also, and you know, there's nothing wrong with, you know, tweaking your resume to a different employer if you want to highlight a certain type of experience. That just shows that you're doing your research and really learning about the person, you know, the organization you're applying to. And you know, I know other folks have said that, but it is so important. Like, you have to show that you actually understand something about the group you're applying for, because it's hard to convey just how insulting it can be, frankly, when you get a form cover letter and then they email you like, "Did you get it?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I got it," but you didn't really, you don't explain this to them. You know, they're just supposed to know from your silence. But you know, if you don't show the interest and the willingness to really dig in and learn, that can be a bit of a red flag. So I would just say that.
I have a question. I'm going to pivot a little bit from post-grad to where they are right now with curriculum selection. So often law students ask me and others, you know, bar prep courses versus all the animal law courses they can take if they're able to go to Lewis and Clark for the summer school. How do you, in your law school experiences and as mentors for students, how do you work with them on curriculum planning? And what do you think are some fundamental classes besides administrative law that students should look into, at least for interest? Mine would be contract drafting, because I really loved it and it's very helpful. That's my pitch.
Well, my first piece of advice is take animal law. By a show of hands, are any of you at schools where animal law is not offered?
Contact me and we can get that changed.
Yeah, that's way too many. So I mean, just in the 30 years that I've been in the legal profession, I think the number of schools offering animal law has gone from like 20 to 150 or something like that. It's
164.
Wow, see what I mean?
Maybe more.
Growing before our eyes. So there should absolutely not be that many hands in the room where animal law is not offered. To the extent it is not offered, absolutely, ALDF is your source. I was actually the first to teach animal law at Florida A&M Law School with the help of a seed grant from ALDF, and they provide that for schools where animal law has not yet been offered. So absolutely talk to the ALDF folks here, talk to me about that. I'm happy to give you my experience on how that worked quite well. Also, you should never apologize to yourself or others for taking an animal law course if it is offered. When I was teaching animal law, and still do, I billed it as the best bar review course in the curriculum. I mean, it's an outstanding course in terms of its breadth of coverage, all the different subject areas it covers, and a very good course to take in your third year for that reason. But also, it's I would call it a gateway drug in many ways, in the sense that it opens your mind to how many different areas of law you might want to reinforce your understanding of as a piece of animal law. So I was someone who taught tort law and constitutional law prior to teaching animal law, and I really had to revisit much of what I was teaching in animal law from my prior exposure in teaching tort and constitutional law, because it was so relevant to know that so well, to really appreciate how important it is for animal law issues. And that's true for many other areas that I'm not as familiar with, but certainly for you as aspiring animal law practitioners, it's amazing how broad the scope is. Anybody with any interest in law can find a place in animal law for sure. And then the other piece about the law school preparation part is, I think that tends to be an overemphasis in bar-related courses, especially in your third year, and that varies from school to school, but I would ultimately encourage you to know yourself, and ultimately know that if you feel like you're a good self-preparer, you don't have to spend your entire year taking bar-related courses. You can take courses that are related to your passion and still have plenty of relevant preparation for the bar exam. So I wouldn't sell your opportunity for breadth in your legal education short by getting pulled into that. I've got to take everything that's on the bar. It's impossible to do that in your 3 years of law school, and you may not enjoy it and get as much out of it as you would pursuing courses that are relevant to your interests, including animal law related classes.
For those of you who are at schools that don't have animal law yet, I'm sorry, but I will echo Priscilla. Talk to her, and you can do it. My school didn't have an animal law course when I was there 15 or however many years ago, and I got one added, and now I get to go speak as a guest speaker there, which is amazing. So I would encourage that. Also, there are opportunities. Lewis and Clark has at least 3 short animal law classes over the summer. At least 2 of those are available online. So that's an option for you, particularly the online ones if you're not able to travel. I teach a 2-week intensive animal law course at Vermont Law School every summer. That's open to folks, so there are other avenues, and it's also not the end of the world if you don't get to take animal law, because as I said before, all law is animal law. It intersects with everything, and so at Lewis and Clark we're so lucky because we have more than 20 animal law classes, but the students don't need to and can't and shouldn't take all of those classes. They should be selective and also take other classes because they're all going to be important and they're all going to give you a feel for what are the things that really interest you, what are the things that you're strong in, and no matter what class it is, there will be a way to apply it to animals.
So at my law school, we did have an animal law class, which was good at Florida State, but there certainly wasn't 20 of them, and so one thing that I did that I would recommend to some of you who are interested, anyone who's interested, I did a writing seminar. And it was, Florida State has a pretty renowned environmental law program, which was what really got me there. But I was able to kind of pigeonhole in a paper about factory farming and then be able to have this faculty person, professor, really work on it with me through the course of the semester. And then afterward, I ended up getting it published, which, again, is a nice kind of feather in the cap. All these animal metaphors, I'm sorry, pigeonholing and feathers and caps. It was on the ground, it was not plucked, I swear.
It was a synthetic feather, it's fine.
But I would, that sort of thing where if it's not given to you, find a class where, it's a more open writing class where you can, and hopefully, the professor might give you a little bit of pushback, but you're the one paying tuition at the end of the day, so you tell them that they have to respond to your interest because that's part of what they're supposed to be doing. So don't be shy about it, even if they don't, the institution doesn't show a lot of openness to it. I think you can also say to them, like, look, and I think this is a big part of what Priscilla does, maybe subtly shame them, like, come on, every other school's got it, like, what's wrong with you guys?
And just to add one more thing, which I guess builds on all of the points, is that even if you don't manage to do it as part of your curriculum or in your schooling, don't undervalue the research that you can do on your own sitting in front of your computer. Like, I know it's not the same as having it on your list of subjects, but a lot of my work is just sitting, looking at Google Scholar, looking at academia, looking at ResearchGate, reading law reviews, and educating yourself on these things. You might not have a formal thing, but I assure you that you will build a full scope of knowledge on a broad variety of issues, and that will only make you all the better for it. I know you don't have a lot of time, but if you really are interested in the subject and you're not able to take it, or you want to focus your specific legal studies on other areas, do it yourself. You really can. There's so much information out there that you can use.
Yeah, I never got a chance to take an animal law course, so don't feel bad if you don't. I got all of my education through my summer clerkships. Speaking of which, the deadline for ALDF-CJP clerkships is in, 10 days, 9 days, so please apply. Also my other piece of advice, do a clinic. Get some actual practical experience, just standing in a courtroom or doing actual legal work.
I have a few things to tack on. The first one is going back to what Kevin was mentioning with the writing group. If your school has independent study or a reading group with other students, or even if it's an informal reading group and you and your friends just want to get together, Animal Legal Defense Fund put out 3 different course guides that are available online on companion animal issues, wildlife and the law, and farmed animals. You could always use that to structure your own learning, your own class, if an animal law class isn't available, or just to supplement. speaking to what Amy was talking about with self-education, I host the Animal Law Academy from the Animal Legal Defense Fund, and this is a free webinar series, and we have a ton of webinar recordings already online, and for 2020, we're going even bigger with our Animal Law Academy, so that's a great resource. It's free. There are usually an hour to an hour and a half webinars that you can tune in, you can watch later, and that's another great way to just add to your knowledge base. Lastly, I know that there's a few student chapters in here who have actually worked on getting an animal law course added to their school. By a show of hands, who has done that work before? Perfect. So look around you. Yes, thank you so much for that work. And look around you, and if you're interested, you can always chat with them about their experiences going through that, and definitely reach out to me. So, more questions. Perfect.
Another thing that I know is important for animal law is not so much direct advocacy, is sort of in-house counsel and client side work for nonprofits, but it seems to me like there's not a lot of overlap between the skills for impact mitigation and more transactional work. And I'm wondering sort of how those experiences feed into each other, or whether they're really separate from the employer's purview, and whether there's a potential way for law students to try to prepare themselves for both, or whether you should really just try to specialize in one rather than the other.
He worded that so eloquently, I'm going to try to paraphrase it, but essentially asking for in-house counsel at nonprofits and corporations doing animal law work, it seems more transactional path, and so is there a way to bridge between civil litigation work and transactional law to prepare yourself for that opportunity if it arose, or do you sort of have to plan to be transactional, a transactional attorney, in-house counsel? Can you do it all?
I'm going to try to be helpful.
Yeah.
I mean, as lawyers, we are going to have multiple careers and multiple focuses in our lives, no matter what. And that's just how life works. And you don't know what opportunities are going to happen down the line, and you can't really predict it. And one of the most important things law school teaches you is how to learn new areas of the law, because we're all constantly having to learn. So you may start out in litigation and transition at some point to corporate law, because there are a growing number of those types of positions with organizations as well. So again, I think that's a reason to take a breadth of classes so that you are prepared for either pathway, and then see what opportunities are available and go with them.
Yeah, so I've been in both of those roles. When I was general counsel of Legal Freedom Project, it was a lot of transactional things, but it also, I mean, if you're trying to help the nonprofit and you're trying to help animals, it does give you opportunities to do that in a sense that might seem more beneficial than just a transactional attorney. But I mean, for example, a lot of these nonprofits don't have, the bigger ones do, but a lot of them don't have, planned giving strategies, or, I mean, it might, I guess, I see what you're saying. It's not impact litigation, and I think it depends partly on the nonprofit you're working at, because if you do have a good idea as a general counsel, they might want you to do it, but or they might let you litigate it. So I think it depends on where you're actually working. But there is most of these, at least I know a lot of the other nonprofits, they'll farm out work to bigger firms, so you don't get an opportunity for impact litigation there. So there's certainly less of an opportunity. But what Delcy is saying, I do think that you should still do both, because so say you go into impact litigation, you still might have to form your own nonprofit. You still might have to learn how to incorporate, get 501c3 status, set up planned giving, do fundraising. Those are still valuable skills to have, even though it's not, as directly impactful as impact litigation, or maybe it is, because impact litigation can take a long time too. So I think you should try to learn both, and jumping into litigation from the get-go too is also, you should probably, ease into that. You know, that's the transactional stuff might be an easier stepping stone to start with.
Yeah, I would just say to not, I think there is, like, just to follow on, to have a breadth of experience. But if you really picture yourself as being someone who's standing up in court advocating, I would try to get more of that experience rather than, because it's a totally different thing, you know, transactional, you're both, two parties want to get something done, more or less on the same page. Litigation, the complete opposite. So you really have to be, and you know, some people can switch gears like that, which is great, but it is a very different mindset, I think, to stand up in court or even to litigate on a case. But I will say also that, you know, because these impact litigations can be so large, there could be a whole army of lawyers that never see the inside of a courtroom but are still working on the case. And in some ways, the two can, in a weird way, blend together because at the end of the day, you're in a room staring at a screen and there's a lot that cross applies. But if you do picture yourself, you know, really wanting to be in court and advocating, I would say try to go out there and argue with some people as much as you can.
Just start fights, you know? Yeah. Other questions? I have one, if you don't mind. So all of these lovely students will be networking their hearts out this weekend. What are some networking tips that you find both as one networking and then the one being networked? Tips from both sides.
This is my favorite part. So email has transformed networking, and that's really good news for all of you like me who were shy, and believe it or not, still am shy in large group settings with a bunch of strangers. So I think it's really amazing how much you can do without even meeting people face to face these days. I mean, it's remarkable how many colleagues I've had for 5-10 years that I've never met, and I've just been connecting with them by email and other means that don't involve face-to-face contact. So I think that's rule number one, is that use the non-face-to-face domain as best you can, and be bold about it. I mean, don't be obnoxious, but reach out to people expressing your interest and why you're contacting them. And I think most people are pretty good about wanting to be useful. Some are really interested in being useful, so don't think of yourself as a nuisance. I'm sure everyone up here is in that category of wanting to be helpful if you reach out. So I think that's the first piece of advice, is don't feel like you're being an intruder, and be ambitious about reaching out in that domain. And then I would say another thing about that is, what I tell my students is leveraging their contacts. So making the contact is good, but staying in touch with those contacts is even more important. So it's like giving an update to your friend. You know, here's what I've done on this lately, and just don't do it in the form of a mass email, but people you know you've made a connection with, and that you'd like to capitalize on that connection. Keep them up to date about what you're doing and what you're interested in getting into, and that's remarkably helpful in building your opportunities and your network. And people are great about, again, by email, doing e-introductions of you to people that you might need to meet, and they're happy to facilitate that connection. So all of that is happening before you've even had a face-to-face meeting, and then all those rules apply as well. Definitely suggest coffee or lunch with people that you just want to talk to and bounce some ideas off of. I mean, that's incredibly useful. And I think that there is a lot to that idea of people are more likely to hire non-strangers. And I've been on the hiring committee for law professors for decades, and I can tell you that a lot of the people who ultimately get the jobs were people that the hiring committee knew of in some way, and they weren't complete strangers. They weren't complete pieces of paper. So, you know, you can't underestimate how valuable that is. You're, at the end of the day, a person, and you're trying to get an opportunity with other people, and don't downplay how valuable that is to remain in touch as a person, whether it's in person or by email. Just be on people's radar screens, and don't be afraid to ask for help. And you'd be surprised how helpful people will be if you just ask.
I would just add one small thing to that. I think that's all great, what Randy said, but the other thing that to keep in mind is just if you don't hear back the first time or even the second time, don't assume that it's like, oh, they don't like me, they don't want to hear. You know, it's busy, and a lot of us are very short-staffed. We only have so much time. That's not an excuse. I try to get better about it, but just be persistent and don't think that, look, if someone says don't email me, that's one thing, don't email them, but you shouldn't never assume that, especially if it's one of us, you know, who's working in the field, that we're just like blowing you off, because that's almost certainly not the case. But I know it can feel like, you know, you're throwing something down a well and never getting anything back. But keep throwing it down the well, because like Randy said, that's how you signal your seriousness, and that can make all the difference.
Add one thing. It does get easier. So at least in my experience, I found, and feel free to agree or disagree, but I found the more you do, the more networking you do, the more you put yourself out there, the more people you meet, over time you have to do less and less of it. It will lead to exponential growth. It'll be much easier. I mean, you know, in the beginning, it's hard to find opportunities. But if you're persistent and people know you're a competent attorney and they trust your opinion on things, the longer you go, you will find yourself having to, you know, unfortunately turn down opportunities. Like, I'm sorry, I don't have time to do that, or I'm working on this other project, and you know, so get over the hump. It does get, at least in my experience, I don't know, I feel like it gets easier as if you're persistent as time goes by.
Yeah, I definitely echo that in the sense of getting over just the fear of networking, the figuring it out. Eventually, it'll just become natural. You'll just be yourself, and everything will be fine. And again, yeah, it's a small community, and while it's growing, it still is small. So your name recognition can go far. Mm-hmm. And I think Kathleen, you had,
I just add, I mean, I get nervous meeting new people, so I'll like prep an intro of like, hey, my name is this, I'm a 2L at this law school, and I'm really interested in this kind of law. And don't like be weirded out if you say that like 20 times in one night, because it's all different people. If you run out of things to talk about, ask people about their companion animals, ask to see pictures on their phone. It's one of the easiest ways.
Like, ask me about my cat, and I'll talk to you for an hour.
Yeah.
And maybe just one more thing to add is also just don't underestimate the importance of your colleagues that are sitting with you. I think it's nice to always think about meeting like important people from like big organizations, but I think it's really important to connect with your peers. And you'll find, you know, sometimes even at an event like this, you'll meet someone the day before, and then the next day they'll be talking to somebody else you did want to meet. So it's kind of nice to just like talk to everyone and be nice to everyone, because you never really know where it's going to lead. So don't always just focus maybe on meeting big people. I think it's important to have that goal in mind and prepare that, but really just like consider your peers as equally important, because you'll end up working with them one day as well.
Yeah, you are sitting with your colleagues right now. Other questions? Yes. Great question. The question is, there's a lot of advice given to law students to, when they're applying to non-animal law related positions, to sort of downplay your animal law experience. So how can you have that experience translate in a cover letter, in a resume, in your application generally, for bolstering what you have learned with animal law when applying outside of that field?
I'm just going to speak to one piece of that I'm most familiar with. I try not to talk about things I don't know about. But the environmental animal piece is something that deserves mentioning, because a lot of people go into this with the wrong assumptions. One of the things that motivated me publishing the book on the animal and environmental connections is that these two fields are often at odds with each other. And so even though you might think that, well, I'm doing animal work, certainly environmental groups would seize on that as wonderful. It's often like oil and water. It's really It's gotten better in some respects, and so I think it's going to be important to strategically package the relevance of any kind of animal experience for a particular environmental opportunity. It can be quite valuable, but you shouldn't go in thinking that it's going to be relevant, even though the fields ought to be more compatible than they are. And the other part that you've heard before is just that valuable legal experience is very transferable. And if an employer doesn't see valuable animal experience as something that will make you a better candidate for their capacity, their law practice, that would give me a bad feeling. I mean, you shouldn't have to apologize for valuable animal law experience, because a lot of those are transferable skills.
I would say, from my own experience, doing all animal law stuff, or as much as I could throughout law school, and with the hope, of course, of getting a job as soon as possible. I started, in my first kind of real job was as a plaintiff's attorney, and I can recall having those discussions, interviews. I think for plaintiffs' work in particular, you have an affinity for the underdog, which I think is something that resonates with most plaintiffs' attorneys. You're willing to stick your neck out. You're willing to do something creative. You're willing to maybe take a position that isn't the most popular. I think those can all be things that resonate with a potential employer. But you can also do a little research. The internet's amazing. You can just find out, oh, this guy who has a plaintiff's firm was at the animal law conference, for example, or somewhere else where some signal that or even like social media, people don't hide their feelings on much of anything these days. So, you can be strategic about it. And I would say always, that's not like a sneaky thing, changing your resume, changing your cover letter. That's what you should be doing, because it shows that you are serious about what the work that this employer is doing, but also that you know how to sell yourself in a way, because we're in the persuasion business, and that's a huge part of what we all have to do.
Yeah, and just to echo that, it's all about how you frame your experience. If you have just straight animal law stuff on your resume and you're applying for a non-animal law job, they're probably going to look at that and say they're not going to stick around for more than 6 months if they get offered a job in animal law. Like, clearly that's their passion and they don't want to stay here. So if you're looking to really shift to something that's non-animal law, yes, to a certain degree, downplay it, but also find the bridges. So if you're looking to work with domestic violence victims, talk about the link, or, just like find something that connects your experience to what you're trying to do.
Thank you. There was another question somewhere. Yes. The question is asking about negotiation tactics and skills, and other non-traditional civil litigation skills. How do those translate, and do you see that sometimes they might have a bigger impact or a priority for what the work you're doing? I think I don't know if I worded that right, but hopefully that's close.
I'm going to take a bash at that because I did commercial law for a long time, and I think the sort of skills that I built up there are fundamental to my animal law practice. I think not only did it teach me how to run an organization properly, like corporate governance skills, non-profit, drafting contracts, managing projects, things like that, but if you look at the way that a lot of the animal law or policy work is going, it's really negotiating with big corporations, and we're seeing less and less maybe governments willing to make laws, different laws, and changing the law, but we're seeing companies changing their policies. So I think it's a huge skill to have if you're able to speak the language that corporations speak and talk to their policies and negotiate with them, see what matters to them, which is really at the end of the day profitability and their reputation with their customers. So if you can understand that in the language they speak, it's invaluable for animals and for your career. That's in my personal view.
Perfect. Any other questions? We have time for about one or two more. Madison? What was the last part, especially with? Yes, money. The question is, as Ryan alluded to, you could take on a case independently. You don't need an organization to back you. How would you go about doing that and still pay your rent? Putting you on the spot.
Income is overrated. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, that can be hard. You know, your first years out of law school, you know, probably not going to make great money anyway. Yeah, you're gonna have to just take it, I guess. I don't, if you want to do it, I'll speak to the second part of it because I don't know how to answer the income part because you know, I graduated law school in 2010, which was like that at 09 and 10 were the worst years to graduate. Every firm in the country shuttered. Like the layoffs were, it was like down like negative like 15,000 attorney jobs across the country. I mean, it was, everyone got fired, so no one was getting a job when I graduated. If you want to take on a case yourself, so was your question how to just do that? Well, I mean, you have to find the plaintiff, or I mean, if you've networked enough, it might find you. So I would say, first you're going to have to, you know, put yourself in a position where you're going to have an opportunity to get a case. But or perhaps, I mean, is there a particular issue you have in mind, Miss?
Yeah.
Okay. So what I would do is I would try to first figure out the best way to get the firmest standing in that case, and, you know, make a hierarchy of the best ways to get standing, and just try to find plaintiffs for each. You know, it might even be yourself or a family member. You know, but then you can just. I would also stress test the idea against some other attorneys that are maybe more senior. But you can just do it. You don't know what's gonna happen. I mean, and then you can, you know, to Delcy's point, all areas of the law intersect. You don't know where you're gonna find something to challenge it. You know, we had a case against a slaughterhouse, which we'd won fees on a slap motion, and which was just First Amendment issue. It was a case against slaughterhouse, but, you know, we were able to because we had a fee award against the slaughterhouse, we were able to use the post-judgment debt collection and which is seemingly unrelated to animal law, but we froze the slaughterhouse's bank accounts and said, you know, release, you know, 4 cows to us, or you're not going to be able to pay your workers, and so, which worked. So I guess what I'm saying is you can make your own way and just you have to figure out something, you know, I don't want to say creative, but you can have the confidence to do it. But first, you have to find a plaintiff, and then you can, you know, once you establish that, you know, again, test the idea with some senior attorneys, see what they think. I'll take a look at it for you if it's you know, I'm happy to give you my time and look at it. But then, you know, just you can just try to get a partner on it maybe also, but just do it. As for the money thing, I have no advice there. I did, you know. You're going to wind up doing some stuff for free, so it's just the way it goes. Try to find cases that have fee shifting statutes, so at least you can get your fees at the end of it, perhaps. But it's the nature of the beast. You are gonna wind up working for free, probably more often than you want. Don't let yourself get taken advantage of, because that happens too. Because we all want to say yes, because everyone's got a sad story. But yeah, you're gonna wind up working for free a lot. But I don't know if that was valuable, but.
When I was with the public interest firm, we did a lot of work in that space and trying to figure out, okay, how can we bring this case and at least be able to eat, you know, nothing fancy, but just survive. And A big piece of it is building coalitions, and that goes back to the networking. But if you can get 5 different organizations that are interested and want to be involved and can share the costs, it becomes much more manageable. So part of our jobs, we're actually putting those coalitions together to get them involved in supporting the case. The fee shifting statutes are also valuable. I mean, the APA and the ESA are both implicated in the matters that you referenced. But of course, you can only get those if you succeed, and we face uphill battles, and you may also be on the hook, or your clients may be on the hook for fees as well. So that's something that you have to weigh, and it's, I mean, some people pick a selection of cases, some in which they're much more likely to succeed and get fees, and those will cover them in order to manage. And I would, if you're interested in going this route, I would talk to people. There are solo practitioner animal lawyers. Matthew Strugar is one. I worked with him previously at PETA. He's going to be here at the conference, and he's trying to make these things work. So that's just one person I would recommend talking to this weekend, but there are others as well.
If you talked about punk rock music, he'll respond more.
Thank you all. So we are going to wrap up. I just wanted to ask our panelists if they have any last words of wisdom to impart, or are you guys out of wisdom? No?
Apply for the CJP fellowship. 4 out of the 5 people currently are in our department started as 2L clerks, so please do that.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We'll all be here all weekend, so do come up and introduce yourself if I haven't met you already. Our panelists will be there, so we can always continue these conversations, especially if you have specific questions unique to your situation or your law school. And now we will break for lunch. Thank you so much.